This is my true story. I never thought my story would end this way. I was a father who built everything with my bare hands. A house, a future, a family. I carried hope like a shield, believing my son would stand by me when my body grew weak. But on the day he drove me to a nursing home and walked away without looking back, I learned what betrayal truly feels like. He even stole my money, thinking I was finished. But he forgot one thing. I was still alive. Before I tell you what I did next, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe so my story can reach more people. I was not born into wealth. I was born into struggle. My hands were calloused before I was a man. My back bent under labor before most boys even learned how to stand tall. I carried bricks, shoveled dirt, lifted loads heavier than my body, and walked home with pockets nearly empty. But I told myself it was worth it, because every coin I saved, every meal I skipped, every hour of sleep I lost was for my son. I wanted him to grow up in a world I never knew, a world with food on the table, clothes without holes, and nights where he could sleep without hunger. When he was small, I worked 2 jobs, one during the day, another when the sun fell. Sometimes I would come home so tired that my hands shook while holding him. But I held him anyway. I kissed his forehead, promised him a future, and left again before dawn. I walked in the rain, in the snow, in the burning heat, because his tomorrow mattered more than my pain. When I ate little. When I slept light. Every sacrifice I made was an investment in him. I gave him everything I never had. When he wanted toys, I found a way. When he wanted books, I bought them, even if it meant pawning something of mine. I patched my shoes with tape so I could afford him new ones. I wore the same jacket for years so he could dress in fresh clothes. His birthdays were always filled with gifts, balloons, and cake. Mine were often forgotten, but I didn't care, because seeing him smile was enough. As he grew older, the expenses grew too. School fees, books, uniforms, field trips. I worked extra hours, borrowed when I had to, and skipped medicine for my own body, just to make sure he never missed a chance. When he was sick, I stayed by his bed all night, holding his hand, whispering prayers, telling him everything would be fine, even when my heart feared otherwise. When he failed, I encouraged him. When he succeeded, I celebrated more than he did. When he became a man, I gave even more. I paid for his education, covering debts that he created when he was careless. I bailed him out when creditors came knocking. I gave him the family house, thinking it would be his foundation, his pride, his safe place. I even paid for his wedding, smiling through the bills because I believed I was not just securing his future, but also securing mine. A father gives, but he also hopes that in old age his son will give back. I thought I had done enough to secure respect, enough to earn peace, enough to guarantee that in my final years I would be surrounded by care, not cruelty. But my sacrifices became invisible to him. What I saw as proof of love, he began to see as weakness. What I gave freely, he began to take for granted. Still, I told myself love never returns empty. I told myself the boy I had raised would not forget. I was wrong. Cruelty rarely announces itself with thunder. It creeps in slowly, softly, almost disguised as something else. At first, it was in his tone. My son's voice, once full of warmth when he said, "Father," began to carry impatience. He no longer asked me how I felt. He no longer sat with me for tea. When I spoke, he sighed as if my words were heavy stones dragging him down. I told myself it was stress, that life was harder for the young, that he would come around. But deep inside, I felt the change beginning. Then came the words, small ones at first, sharp enough to sting, but not deep enough to scar. "You're slow. You don't understand. You're old." I laughed them off, pretending not to care, but each word sank into me. Each insult reminded me that my age was no longer something he respected, but something he mocked. The hands that had built his life now trembled with time, and instead of gratitude, he pointed at them with scorn. His complaints grew louder with the bills. He started talking about how much it cost to keep me alive. I overheard him telling his wife that I ate too much, that my medicine was too expensive, that my presence in the house was a burden. A burden. That was the word that shattered me most. I had carried him on my shoulders through sickness and storms. I had gone hungry so he could eat. I had bent my back so his could stand straight. And now he saw me not as a father, but as weight he wished to throw away. I tried to ignore it. I told myself love was still there, hidden under his frustrations. But even his eyes changed. When he looked at me, I no longer saw the sparkle of a son looking at his father. I saw calculation. I saw coldness. I saw a man who was already planning a future without me in it. There were nights when I sat in my chair, staring at the walls I had built, wondering how the boy I had raised could vanish so completely. How had kindness turned to cruelty? How had respect turned to mockery? The signs were all there, but I closed my eyes to them, because sometimes a father would rather believe a lie than face the truth that his own blood has grown cold. And so, I endured. I endured the sharp words, the impatient sighs, the muttered complaints. I endured the mocking glances, the laughter behind my back, the whispers of burden and cost. I endured it all, hoping for even one moment of love to return. But with each passing day, those first signs of cruelty became seeds, and those seeds were growing into something darker, something that would soon destroy everything between us. The day it happened began like any other. He told me to get ready, said we were going for a drive. His voice was oddly calm, almost too kind, and for a moment I felt hope. I thought maybe he was taking me somewhere special, maybe to the park, maybe for a meal. Maybe he remembered the years I had given him. I put on my best shirt, the one I saved for important days, and I walked to the car with slow steps but a light heart. Foolish old man. I did not know that kindness was only a mask. We drove in silence for a long time. I tried to ask where we were going, but he just said, "Don't worry." I looked out the window and saw the streets passing by, farther and farther from the places I knew. My stomach grew tight. Something felt wrong. But still, I trusted him, because he was my son. A father's trust is the hardest thing to kill. When we pulled up, I saw the building. Tall, white, clean, with big glass doors and the smell of antiseptic even from the car. My heart dropped. I had seen places like it before. Nursing homes, homes for the old, homes where families put the ones they no longer wanted to care for. My hands shook. I turned to him and whispered, "Son, what is this?" He did not look at me. He just said, "It's for the best," and opened his door. Inside, the air was cold. The floors shined, the walls were bare, and the sound of slow footsteps echoed down the halls. He walked to the counter, spoke to the woman there, and signed papers. Papers that sealed my fate. Papers that treated me not like his father, but like a package to be dropped off. I tried to protest, tried to speak, but my voice broke in my throat. My son, my own blood, signed me away with the same hand I once held to teach him how to write. Then he turned to me, placed his hand on my shoulder, but not with love. It was the touch of dismissal. He said, "You'll be fine here." And without waiting for an answer, he left. The door closed behind him, and I heard the sound of his car driving away. That sound was the sound of abandonment, the sound of betrayal, the sound of my heart shattering into pieces too small to ever repair. I sat on the bed they assigned me, staring at the white walls, listening to the muffled cries of other forgotten souls down the hall. The weight of it crushed me. I was not visiting. I was not staying for a night. I had been left like trash on the side of the road. And then, as if that cruelty was not enough, the second betrayal came. Days later, I learned that while I was sitting in that sterile room, he had gone to the bank. He had taken my savings, drained the accounts, and transferred the money into his own hands. Every coin, every dollar, every piece of my life's work was stolen while I sat there with nothing but hospital food on a plastic tray. The realization nearly broke me. I had worked decades to build something for him. I had believed it would be his inheritance, his safety, his future. Instead, he took it before I was even gone. He stole not only my wealth, but my dignity, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the bitter truth that my own son valued money more than me. That was the cruel act. Abandonment and theft, done by the very person I had sacrificed everything for. A betrayal so deep it killed the father inside me and left behind something else. Something sharper, harder, colder. The first night in that place felt like a lifetime. I sat on the narrow bed, staring at the pale ceiling, listening to the muffled coughs and cries of strangers in nearby rooms. The smell of disinfectant was heavy, mixing with the faint odor of sickness and loneliness. My bag, half empty, sat by the corner. A nurse brought me food on a plastic tray, cold soup, dry bread, and a cup of water. I lifted the spoon with trembling hands and felt a tear slide down my cheek. Not because of the food, but because I remembered the meals I used to cook for my son. Meals made with love, flavor, and sacrifice. Now I was being fed like a burden. I sat in that silence, and the shame sank deeper than the bruises of any blow could. This was not just a room, it was a cage of humiliation. Every sound reminded me of abandonment. The ticking clock mocked me with every second. The empty chair by my bed reminded me that no one was coming to visit. My son had left me there as if I were already dead. I thought back to the nights when he was a child, nights when storms rattled the roof and he would wake crying, afraid. I would run to his room, hold him tight, whisper in his ear that he was safe, that I would never leave him. I sat awake until he slept again, even when I had to leave for work at dawn. I had been his comfort, his shield, his safety. And now, the boy I once swore to protect had become the man who abandoned me without a second thought. The humiliation cut deeper when I remembered the debts I had paid for him, times when he was reckless with money and creditors came knocking at the door. I had opened my wallet, emptied my pockets, and bailed him out. I had covered his shame with my sweat. Now he had stolen the very savings I built, turning my sacrifices into ashes. In that nursing home, surrounded by strangers and sterile walls, I felt stripped of everything, my family, my money, my dignity. I was reduced to a number on a chart, another old man waiting to die. The betrayal of blood is heavier than chains, and I wore it like an anchor on my chest. And yet, in that heavy silence, something began to stir. The humiliation that bent my head also opened my eyes. My son thought he had won. He thought leaving me there had ended me. But humiliation has two faces, one of sorrow and one of awakening. The more I sat in silence, the more I realized I still had strength left. Not in my body, which was frail, but in my name, in my rights, in the documents still tied to me. I wiped my tears that night and whispered to myself, "This silence will not be my grave. This humiliation will not be my last memory. He may have left me here, but he has forgotten who I am. He will remember." My son believed that by leaving me in that nursing home, he had broken me forever. He thought the locked doors, the cold walls, and the stolen money were the end of my story. He believed I had no fight left, no voice, no power. To him, I was just an old man, abandoned, forgotten, useless. But he forgot one simple truth. Everything he lived in, everything he touched, everything he called his own, still carried my name. The house he slept in, the one with the red bricks and the garden I planted with my own hands, was not his. The deed was mine. The car he drove, the one polished to shine on weekends, was not his. The title was mine. Even the bank accounts he drained so quickly had roots that began in my labor, my sweat, my decades of sacrifice. He thought stealing money meant stealing control, but the law still recognized me. My signature still held weight. My name was still carved into every paper that mattered. As I sat in that sterile room, humiliation fading into thought, I remembered the folder I had left with my lawyer years ago. Inside it were copies of deeds, wills, and documents, proof that I was not erased, proof that I still owned the ground beneath my son's arrogance. He had forgotten about those papers. He had forgotten that the man he abandoned still had the power to decide who kept the roof over his head. As I tell you this story, I don't know how much time I have left in this world before I go back to my God. And I've seen it with my own eyes. When strength fades, respect disappears. One stumble, one fall, and suddenly they call you weak, a burden. That's why I made the Balance and Fall Prevention Guide for seniors. It's not fitness, it's protection. Just 10 minutes a day to stay steady, stay safe, and keep your independence. Download it now. The link is right below in the description. It struck me then. True power is not in youth, nor in strength, nor even in cruelty. True power is in ownership. True power is in patience. My son thought violence and betrayal gave him the upper hand, but I realized his mistake. He believed he had buried me. In reality, he had only given me the silence to sharpen my resolve. I began to think not like a victim, but like the man I once was, the builder, the provider, the father who created from nothing. My son had mocked me, called me worthless, treated me like trash. But in that mockery, he overlooked the truth. He was standing on the very foundation I had laid. Without me, there would be no house, no car, no life of comfort. Without me, he was nothing. The more I thought of it, the more my chest filled not with sorrow, but with quiet strength. He may have stolen my savings, but I still had the power to take back more than money. I had the power to take the very walls he leaned on, the very bed he slept in, the very future he thought was secured. That night, while the halls of the nursing home echoed with silence, I whispered to myself, "He has forgotten who I am. He thinks I am finished. But tomorrow, he will remember." That night I lay awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as shadows moved across the walls. Sleep would not come to me, not because of age or sickness, but because my mind was alive with fire. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a broken man. I did not feel like a burden. I felt the strength of choice returning to me, and it burned hotter than the humiliation that had chained me for so long. The decision grew inside me slowly at first, like a spark, but soon it roared like a storm. My son had cast me aside, left me in a place for the forgotten, and stolen what I had worked a lifetime to earn. He thought he had ended me with cruelty and greed. But that night I swore to myself, he would not see my end. He would see my rise. He would see that the man he mocked still had power to destroy him, not with fists, not with shouts, but with silence and law. I decided I would not beg for his love. I decided I would not wait for an apology that would never come. I decided I would not sit quietly in that nursing home waiting for death. No, I would reclaim my dignity, my wealth, and my freedom, and I would do it in a way that would leave him with nothing but regret. The plan formed with clarity. I would call my lawyer, the one I had trusted for years, the one who had helped me keep my documents safe. I would tell him the truth, every detail of my son's betrayal, and I would give him the power to act. The house, the car, the assets, they were all still tied to me, and through the law, I could strip my son of everything he had stolen, everything he thought belonged to him. But it was more than just money. It was about dignity. It was about showing him that he could not erase me, could not reduce me to nothing. I would make my disappearance not a sign of weakness, but a final act of power. He would wake up one day to find the locks changed, the bank accounts empty, the property gone, and me, vanished into a life where his cruelty could never reach me again. The more I thought of it, the stronger the decision became. There would be no warning, no confrontation, no angry words. Silence would be my weapon. Precision would be my revenge. He would never see me again, and yet every empty room, every unpaid bill, every locked door would remind him of me. I turned my face to the wall that night, and for the first time in a long time, I did not cry. I did not tremble. I did not pray for mercy. I whispered instead, "It is decided." And those words gave me peace. The morning after my decision, I sat by the small window of the nursing home, watching the pale sun rise through streaks of glass. For once, I did not feel trapped. I felt alive because I knew what I was about to do. My son thought I had no weapons left, but I still had the sharpest one of all: my mind, my patience, and my legal right. I waited for the clock to strike 9, and with trembling but steady hands, I dialed the number of my lawyer, a man who had known me for years, a man who helped me put my life's work into order, a man I could still trust. When his voice answered, calm and professional, I felt my chest loosen. I told him everything. I told him how my son had tricked me, abandoned me at the nursing home, stolen money from my accounts. I described the betrayal, not with anger, but with the steady tone of a man who had endured enough. There was a silence on the other end when I finished, and then he said the words I needed most. You still hold the power. And we will use it. We began that very day. He confirmed what I already knew. The house was in my name, the deed untouched. My son might have stolen money, but he could not steal the law. The car, too, still mine. Accounts I thought were gone had trails, records, proof of theft. The lawyer assured me that through the courts and through rightful sale, I could take it all back. The thought gave me strength I had not felt in years. I signed the papers he sent. Each stroke of the pen was like a hammer breaking my chains. He filed motions, he prepared documents, he moved with the speed of a man who understood betrayal and wanted to crush it. Within weeks, the process began. The house was listed. Buyers came. And all the while, my son slept in that very house, unaware that the walls around him were no longer his. I imagined the look on his face when the letter would arrive, telling him the house was no longer his home. The locks would change, the keys would no longer fit, and he would learn the same lesson he had taught me, what it feels like to be left outside. The car was taken next. Quietly, legally, without drama. The title was signed over, the ownership transferred. He would walk into the driveway one morning and find nothing but an empty space. Another reminder that arrogance cannot protect you from truth. And then came the money. Through evidence of his theft, through accounts that bore my name, I moved what I could back into my control. Not to hoard, not to flaunt, but to secure my future. A future far away from his cruelty. Every dollar I reclaimed was not just money. It was a piece of my dignity stitched back together. The nursing home staff watched me closely during those weeks, but they did not know what burned inside me. To them, I was just another old man, sitting quietly, staring at the wall. But inside, I was building an escape, brick by brick, paper by paper. My silence was not weakness. It was preparation. When the sale of the house was complete, the funds transferred, and the final documents signed, I knew the execution was done. The foundation of his arrogance was gone. He lived in comfort because of me, and now, because of me, he would live in emptiness. I packed my small bag quietly. Not much was needed, just a few clothes, some papers, and the strength in my chest. My lawyer arranged the rest, a bank account in my name, a ticket booked, a plan laid out. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I had been left in a nursing home to rot. Instead, I had turned that place into the starting line of my greatest escape. My son thought he locked me away. In truth, he had set me on the path to my revenge. The day I left the nursing home was quiet, almost ordinary to anyone else. But to me, it was the loudest day of my life. I woke before dawn, washed my face slowly in the cold sink, and stared at the man in the mirror. His hair was thinner, his hands were weaker, his body worn. But his eyes were alive again. They did not carry the look of a man waiting to die. They carried the fire of a man ready to begin again. I packed the small bag by my bed. Just a few shirts, a pair of trousers, and my documents, carefully folded in a brown envelope. I had no need for much. What I carried was not in the bag, but in the silence I had chosen, the revenge I had already set in motion. The nurse at the desk looked at me as I walked by, her face puzzled. "Where are you going?" she asked softly. I smiled for the first time in years and said, "Home." But the truth was deeper than that. I was not going home. I was leaving it all behind. My lawyer was waiting outside in his car. He opened the door, and I slid into the seat with a steady breath. As we drove away, I looked back only once at the building. The windows glared in the morning sun, rows of them, each holding a story of someone forgotten. But I was not forgotten anymore. I had remembered myself, and that was enough. We drove past the neighborhoods I once knew. Streets where I had walked with my son, holding his hand as a boy. Shops where I bought him sweets when I had barely enough for myself. Parks where I taught him to throw a ball, to ride a bicycle, to dream. Every corner whispered of sacrifice. But I no longer felt pain at those memories. I felt clarity. The boy I raised was gone, replaced by greed and cruelty. I was not leaving my son. I was leaving a stranger. At the airport, I held the ticket in my hands. A simple piece of paper, but to me it was a key. A key that opened the door to freedom. A key that locked my past behind me. As I sat in the terminal, watching people rush by with their suitcases, I realized how invisible I was. Just another old man waiting for a flight. No one knew the story I carried, the storm that raged behind my calm expression. And I liked it that way. My revenge would not be loud, it would be quiet, sharp, final. When the plane lifted into the air, I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the city grow small below me. Somewhere in that city, my son still slept, thinking his life was secure. But by the time he woke, he would know. The locks would not open. The house would not be his. The accounts would not answer his demands. He would stand in the wreckage of his arrogance and realize his father had vanished. I closed my eyes on that flight and felt peace. True peace, the kind I had not known in decades. For years I had lived in service to others, to my work, to my family, to my son. But now, for the first time, I lived in service to myself. I was no longer a prisoner of blood ties. I was free, and the silence of my departure was my final gift to him, and my greatest revenge. While I was soaring high above the clouds, heading to a land where his cruelty could never reach me, my son was waking up to his nightmare. At first, the morning must have felt ordinary to him. He rose from the bed in the house that I had built, stretched his arms, and walked into the kitchen. Maybe he poured himself coffee. Maybe he smiled with pride at the roof over his head, the walls around him, the life he thought was his. But arrogance is blind, and greed always forgets its roots. He did not know that as he sipped from his cup, the ground beneath his feet had already been pulled away. He would have found it strange when his key no longer turned the front lock. The locks had been changed, the deed transferred, the house sold legally and cleanly to strangers. His anger must have boiled when he called out to the neighbors for help, demanding answers, only to hear whispers of shame traveling faster than fire. They would not look him in the eye, for they knew. They had heard the truth. The son who left his father in a nursing home, the son who stole from the very man who gave him everything, had been stripped of it all. At the bank, his rage would have reached its peak. He stormed in, demanding his money, his savings, his wealth. He slammed his card on the counter, shouted at the tellers, barked at the clerks. But arrogance has no power against an empty balance. His accounts had been drained, every cent reclaimed and redirected by my hand. The zeros on the screen mocked him more than I ever could. The tellers looked at him with pity, with judgment, with quiet disgust. And for the first time, he felt what it was like to be powerless. His phone must have burned with calls. Not from me, for I had vanished, but from creditors, from relatives, from people who once admired him because of the wealth he pretended was his. Now they turned their backs. His so-called friends, the ones who ate at his table and drank his wine, melted away when they realized the fortune was gone. His wife, who once laughed at my humiliation, would have cried in anger now, demanding answers he could not give. Together they would sit in the ruins of their arrogance, staring at the walls of a house that no longer belonged to them, waiting for a father who would never return. Neighbors spoke of me not as a man who was weak, but as a man who had outsmarted his own blood. They admired my silence, my strength, my final move. My son could not silence those whispers. Every corner he turned, every market he walked through, someone would be watching, whispering, "That's the man who betrayed his father and lost everything." His shame became his only companion, louder than any wealth he once stole. And what of me? As he sat in the ruins, I was already gone, across oceans, watching the sunrise in freedom. He had stolen my comfort, my dignity, my trust, but I had taken his foundation, his pride, his fortune. My silence was his torment. My disappearance was his punishment. He would never find me, never call me, never face me again. His betrayal was heavy, but my revenge was heavier. I live now in a place where no one knows my name, and that is the sweetest gift of all. The streets are different here, the language unfamiliar, the faces around me strangers. But there is peace in the air. I sit at small cafes, sip coffee slowly, and watch the world move without fear, without shame. No one here calls me worthless. No one locks me away. No one steals from me. For the first time in years, I belong to myself. When I eat at my own table, I eat with dignity. I set down a proper plate, pour myself water, slice bread, and remember that I am still a man. The taste of betrayal has faded, replaced by freedom. I do not need wealth to feel rich. I need only the knowledge that I chose my ending, not him. He thought he had won when he left me in that nursing home, when he took my money and mocked my age. But the final victory is mine, because I walked away with silence, and I left him with nothing but shame. I imagine him sometimes, sitting in that city that once was mine to give. I see him pacing empty rooms, his wife shouting, his neighbors whispering, his friends gone. I see him looking for me, asking where I am, asking how I did it, asking why I vanished. But no one can answer him. That is his torment. He will never know where I went, never see my face again, never hear my voice again. He lost me not by death, but by my choice. That wound will never heal. And yet, I do not feel hatred anymore. Hatred is heavy. I have carried enough weight in my life, of work, of sacrifice, of disappointment. Now I carry only lightness. The revenge is complete. The lesson is written. His cruelty gave birth to my silence, and my silence gave birth to his downfall. He will live the rest of his life in the shadow of his own actions, and that is justice enough. I walk by the sea in the mornings, let the waves kiss my feet, and feel young again. I laugh with strangers who do not know my story, but see only an old man smiling at the sky. That is enough. I have no need for applause, no need for recognition. My justice is quiet, like the wind that erases footsteps in the sand. My son will never find me, but his memory of what he did will always find him. That is the difference between us. So, let this be my final thought. He left me in a nursing home and stole my money, but I sold his house and left the country. He never found me, and he never will. I won my freedom not through violence, not through shouting, but through silence and disappearance. And in that silence, I discovered the greatest truth. Revenge is not always fire. Sometimes it is simply walking away and never turning back. Before I end, let me tell you, I don't know how much time I have left in this world before I go back to God. That's why I made the Balance and Fall Prevention Guide only for you, so you can stay steady, safe, and independent. Download it now. The link is in the description.